Tantor Audio presents Backstage at the Lincoln Assassination, the untold story of the actors and stagehands at Ford's Theater, by Thomas A. Bogar, narrated by R.C. Bray. Life's but a walking shadow, a poor player that struts and frets his hour upon the stage, and then is heard no more. Macbeth, Act 5, Scene 5. Abraham Lincoln's favorite Shakespearean play. Note about theatrical terms. All stage directions in this account are described from the actor's viewpoint. Thus, stage right is the audience's left, and vice versa. Going upstage, literally because it's sloped, is moving away from the audience, and downstage is toward it. Stage business is anything done by an actor beyond moving across the stage, especially when handling stage properties. The house refers either to the area of the theater where the audience sits or to the audience itself. The wings are the areas immediately off stage, to the right and left, where scenery and properties are stored and the actors wait to make their entrances. Preface. Imagine for a moment that the President of the United States has just been murdered in your workplace by one of your most admired and charismatic colleagues as you stood nearby. Picture the chaos that erupts around you as your mind races, fearing for your own safety and of being thought complicit, recollecting in panic any ill-chosen words you ever uttered that could be construed as hostile to the President, as well as the times you were seen socializing with the assassin, as recently, in fact, as the drink you took with him a few hours ago in the bar next door. From that instant onward, your world would never be the same. You would be interrogated, perhaps imprisoned. You would have to provide testimony, scrupulously accurate and consistent, and endure interview after interview for weeks, months, years, constantly retelling and reliving every detail of an event that occurred in less than 30 seconds. For the rest of your life, you would move frequently, avoid reporters, and perhaps change your name. That night would define the rest of your life and headline your obituary. Precisely that scenario became the terrifying new reality for 46 all-too-human individuals employed by Ford's Theater in Washington, D.C. on the night of April 14, 1865. The events of that night have been told and retold ever since, etched deeply into our national consciousness. But this is not the story of its two central figures, John Wilkes Booth and Abraham Lincoln, and the catastrophic 4 years that brought assassin and martyr together. Rather, it is that of the largely anonymous actors, managers, and stagehands of Ford's Theater on that fateful night, and what befell them afterward. Most of the 46 were completely innocent, unsuspecting of any plot, regardless of whether it was the original plan to abduct the President or the final one to assassinate him. Yet they were nevertheless caught up in a terrifying round of arrests, interrogations, and life-altering consequences. Some unquestionably were complicit in one or the other of the plans. Evidence suggests that Ford's Theater was a hotbed of secessionist thought and sympathy. But most of those involved shrewdly managed to escape detection and punishment. A few exceptionally fortunate ones had the night off, or had finished their parts early and left for the evening, and thus escaped infamy. Previous retellings of the events of that night have followed either Booth out the back door to his fate in a burning barn at the Garrett farm, or Lincoln out the front to his in a bedroom across the street in Peterson's boarding house. Those left behind, huddling in fear on the stage, listening to cries of "burn the place down" filtering in from the furious crowd outside as soldiers took up stations throughout, deserve to have their story told. Some of these actors, managers, and stagehands never spoke of that night again, except privately. Others were considerably, almost competitively voluble. Several divulged pieces in various interviews over many years, but never provided one coherent narrative. Their reticence or insistence in telling their version of its events would vary over time and according to their audience. Any definitive account of the details of the assassination must by necessity incorporate the most credible and objective fragments from all of these accounts, which emerged anywhere between 1 hour and 60 years after the fact. I have consciously given preference to the perceptions and words of those who experienced that night and its subsequent harrowing days from Backstage, rather than to accounts by audience members, as has largely been the case to date. Sadly for the historian, these were not public figures who left their papers to posterity. Quite the opposite. Think how many letters were thrust into fireplaces in the days immediately following the terrible event, and how many correspondents held their breath waiting for the knock on the door that indicated the discovery of letters they had written to the murderer. Certainly, the loss of any normal paper trail, coupled with the silence of those involved and the questionable veracity of those who did speak out, has made it exceptionally difficult to uncover and relate their stories. Most of these unfortunate figures have faded into obscurity. After strutting and fretting their hour upon the stage, they have become walking shadows, from whom we have heard no more. If anything is remembered of them, it is usually erroneously that they were members of Laura Keene's company, which in reality was only 3 visiting actors, Keene, Harry Hawk, and John Diet. The rest were members of the resident stock company of Ford's Theater. But they were all casualties, collateral damage from Booth's rash act. They were, for the most part, war actors and recently hired workers, a ragtag group who had only worked together a few months, in some cases a few weeks or even days. While some were seasoned professionals with Broadway credits, others had barely set foot on a stage. A handful of the Backstage staff were skilled craftsmen and shrewd businessmen. A few were simply supplementing day jobs, performing menial tasks. The lives of those who were present Backstage that night would forever be divided into before and after. They would always feel a surreal bond with those they had worked beside that night, even a few they had met only days before. Whenever they encountered each other again, or dared to speak of it, it would always be that night, with no further reference needed. For some, the assassination meant the end of their careers, and for more than one, nearly the end of their lives. Others forged ahead, coping as best they could with being imprisoned and interrogated as suspected co-conspirators. A few were able to put it all behind them and go on to fulfill successful careers for 40, 50, even 60 more years. Several of the 46 kept in touch with each other, monitoring publicly and privately who would be the last survivor. Most of them carried to their graves the extent of their friendship with John Wilkes Booth, that most charismatic of fellow actors. But without question, he haunted their lives from that fateful moment forward. Chapter 1. Is John Booth crazy? In the half-light Backstage, where sound meant more than sight, hardly anyone took it for a gunshot. Actor Ned Emerson, leaning against a piece of scenery in the stage left wings, studying his lines, thought it came from the apparatus of scene shifting, or from out in 10th Street, part of the week's continuing celebration of the war's end. John Matthews, waiting behind the scenery to go on in the next scene, thought it might be a piece of new stage business introduced to frighten the character of Lord Dundreary. To one actress waiting in the wings, it sounded like the pop of a champagne cork. To someone else, it resembled a lone hand-clap out in the audience. Callboy Will Ferguson, standing by the downstage right prompter's desk beside the evening's star Laura Keene, thought a stack of books he had preset for the next scene had fallen to the floor. Keene herself was sure she knew better, and was incensed. She sent her personal dresser to demand that the stagehands stop firing weapons backstage. Harry Hawk, playing Asa Trenchard, the titular American cousin, was alone out on the sloping forestage, his back to the president's box, delivering a cutting retort to Mrs. Mount Chessington, actress Helen Muzzy, as she exited through the curtained archway of the drawing-room set. For a moment he froze, wondering what had exploded backstage in the property shop. He opened his mouth to finish his line, when a male shout of "Sic semper tyrannis" spun him back toward the audience. Above him, to his left, he saw a dark figure vault the railing of the presidential box as a puff of bluish-gray smoke drifted from its opening. Then came the sound of ripping cloth and a heavy thud, and he recognized his sometime friend John Booth only a few feet away, crouching in an odd, off-balance way. Hawk watched stunned as Booth, clad in a black frock coat over a blue flannel shirt, dark breeches, and tall riding boots, stamped his foot to shed the shreds of a regimental flag he had pulled down with him, along with shards from a picture frame knocked askew above. Booth straightened up, raised high an immense gleaming double-edged bowie knife in his right hand. His hair disheveled, face drained of all color, ebony eyes afire and lips drawn back over his teeth, he rushed at Hawk, who threw up his hands and backpedaled frantically toward the stage right wings, then bolted in terror up the stairs to his dressing room, certain Booth was out to harm him. Behind him Hawk heard Booth clearly. "The South shall be free. I have done it. Virginia is avenged." Then only heavy panting and clumping footsteps. Shoving past Ferguson, Keene, and stage manager John Wright, and knowing the backstage area affords theater in the dark as well as anyone, Booth lurched through the narrow wing space toward a little-used door to the back alley. In his way were actress Jeannie Gurley and conductor Billy Withers, their hushed conversation interrupted by the sound of the shot. Snarling, "Let me pass," Booth slashed at Withers, leaving 2 gashes in his coat, and shoved Gurley back into a pile of stored scenery. Emitting an inarticulate mixture of growls and cries of pain, Booth stumbled to the door, wrenched it open with both hands, and was gone. Just outside, Peanut John, the theater's slow-witted teenage basket boy who had been holding Booth's spirited bay mare, received a blow to the head from the hilt of Booth's knife for his trouble. "Boy, give me my horse," the assassin growled, and in a flash mounted it and galloped out of Baptist Alley, the sound of departing hoofbeats echoing loudly across the cobblestones. In the theater's box office, the sound of the shot sent manager Harry Ford, ticket agents Joe Sesford and Tom Raybould, and Keene's manager-husband John Lutz rushing for the tiny window that looked out into the house. Raybould and Sesford got there first in time to see Booth land off balance on the stage. Both men recognized him immediately. Sesford spoke for them all. "My God, then is John Booth crazy?" Harry ran out into the house in time to see Booth lurching across the stage, knife in hand. Sesford gathered up all their remaining tickets and cash, Lutz grabbing his wife's share. Raybould ran outside to alert stage carpenter James Gifford to secure the backstage area. In the theater, for the first few seconds there was total, stunned silence. Then a shriek rent the air from the president's box, along with a male voice from the front row. "Stop that man!" Others in the audience took up the cry as Mrs. Lincoln began to shriek incoherent words, some of which sounded like, "My husband is shot." From the front row of the orchestra seats, the formidable figure of Major Joseph Stewart leapt to the stage and ran in pursuit of the assailant, but impeded by darkness and actors in the wings, he reached the alley too late to stop him. Then, as if at a common signal, an infernal, terrified roar engulfed them all. Screams, moans, wails, and cries of, "The President has been shot!" Without warning, the audience was on its feet and swarming over the orchestra's instruments left behind after intermission. They surged onto the stage, crying, "Hang him! Kill him! Shoot him! Lynch him!" Not even sure whom they meant by him. Some rushed up the stairs to Hawk's dressing room, demanding that whoever was inside emerge, until he did so and was recognized, and the searchers turned their attention elsewhere. By now the other dressing rooms had emptied, and panicked actors still in costume filled the stage, their grease paint smeared and garish in the footlights' glare. They were quickly caught up in what Emerson later termed a whirlpool, an inextricable chaos of mad humanity swirling hither and thither in hysterical aimlessness. No one seemed to have retained a scintilla of self-possession. To 19-year-old actress Helen Truman, it was the hell of hells, an inferno of noise. For the rest of her life there would never be anything like it on earth, the shouts, Groans, curses, smashing of seats, screams of women, shuffling of feet, and cries of terror created a pandemonium terrible to hear. Gasman Ed Gorman worked feverishly in the far downstage right corner of the wings to turn down the footlights, lest the clothes of theater-goers clambering onto the stage catch fire, while simultaneously raising the house lights from half to full to quell the rising panic and signal the audience to leave the house. Stagehands Ned Spangler and Jake Rittersbach, who had futilely rushed after Booth, returned to center stage to pull the opposing halves of the scenery back into the wings, opening up the stage space. "That was John Booth!" exclaimed Rittersbach. "Hush your mouth," blurted Spangler. "You don't know whether it's Booth or not." That utterance would be twisted into something quite different in the coming months, and prove to be Spangler's undoing. Leaving the scene did nothing to help him. Grabbing his coat, he rushed through the door Booth had taken, only to be confronted by two women, future witnesses whose house faced the back of Ford's, who accused him of being up to no good. Loudly denying it, Spangler wrestled himself into his coat and hurried up the alley in the rain in search of Booth for an explanation. Inside the theater, women began to faint. The first was Gurley, but Emerson reached her in time, fanning her with his Dundreary wig as others helped her off into the wings. Turning, he caught another young woman who had ascended from the audience only to collapse onto the apron of the stage, setting her down in the box immediately below the president's. Wright rushed to rescue his wife, who had fallen when she tried to reach the stage by standing atop an abandoned bass viol. Cautiously emerging from his dressing room, Hawk encountered acting manager H.B. Phillips, who demanded, "Who did it?" "An actor," replied Hawk. "What's his name?" Phillips asked. "I won't tell," Hawk said. "There'll be a terrible uproar, and I want to keep out of any trouble," Phillips exploded. "Don't be a fool. This man has shot the president, and you'll be hanged if you hesitate to give his name." Only then came the admission. It was John Booth. Just as Hawk uttered the name, Matthews stepped between them. "You're a liar," he asserted, but Hawk held his ground. "I am not a liar, and you know that I am not. I could swear to it if I was on my deathbed." Phillips urged Hawk to tell what he knew to the authorities as soon as he changed out of his costume and rubbed off his grease paint. The rest of the cast and crew huddled in small, frightened groups in the center of the stage, staring up into the president's box, where he remained slumped in his chair, his head on his chest, with his eyes closed and a slight smile still on his face. His frantic wife fluttered beside him. From the ledge of the box, Clara Harris called for water, and property manager Jimmy Maddox ran to fill a pitcher. Seemingly out of nowhere, two men appeared to hoist a young naval officer from the audience onto their backs, up toward the lip of the box nearly 12 feet above the stage. They could hear someone pounding on its door from the dress circle above, but no one had entered yet to assist the stricken president. Actors Emerson and Tom Gurley, Jeannie's father, brought a table out from the wings to boost them higher, and soon Dr. Charles Taft made it up and over, losing his cape in the process. With an instinct born of years of her own theatrical management, Laura Keene strode to the footlights and called out repeatedly, "Order, gentlemen, order! For God's sake, have presence of mind and keep your places, and all will be well." Gurley, more familiar than Keene with the passages backstage, led her through the stage left door, then left to an outside stairway up to the Fords' apartment next door, through which they reached a reception room that connected back with the theater's dress circle. By now, another doctor, Charles Leal, had made it through the door into the box, and Keene followed. As the doctors lowered the president to the floor, tearing at his clothing to find the wound, with Leal's permission, she knelt at Lincoln's side and cradled his head in her lap. It struck her how much from that perspective he resembled Montaigne's Dead Christ. When Maddox's pitcher arrived, she bathed his face. Gurley hovered in the doorway along with Ferguson, who had worked his way through the audience to the box. Below them, in the house, Harry Ford knew he had to act, and quickly. He summoned doorkeeper Buck Buckingham, who had frozen in the act of filing away ticket stubs, and sent him in search of Washington Mayor Richard Wallach, whom he remembered seeing in the lobby. Alerted, Wallach fought his way down the center left aisle nearly to the stage and took command, ordering the theater cleared. At first, no one moved. Then the crowd began to inch toward the exits thrown open onto 10th Street, but a roiling crowd out there made it almost impossible to leave. Word had reached the outside world. The movement at the top of the stairs curving down into the lobby caught their eyes, and a funereal hush settled over the house. 4 soldiers and the doctors who had been attending the wounded president carried him nearly naked to the waist toward the stairs, using a shutter they had grabbed from the box's narrow passageway, with Tom Gurley assisting them around the curve of the dress circle. Turning the president to keep his head elevated, they inched their way down, a young Army lieutenant clearing the way. Keene, supporting the sobbing Mary Lincoln, followed. As they reached the bottom of the stairs and turned to enter the crowd outside, Ford stepped up to the actress, putting his arm around her waist to keep her from the crowd in the street. Her hair in disarray, her dress bloodied, she beseeched the provost guard and patrolmen rushing in to take control of the theater. "For God's sake, try to capture the murderer!" When asked by someone in the crowd if the president still lived, she gasped, "God only knows." Backstage, the actors frantically gathered up personal possessions, not bothering to change out of costume, as rumors flew that they would all be arrested, or that the theater was about to be torched. On Wright's orders, the men high in the flyloft rang down the curtain, not to rise on another production for over a century. Chapter 2. A hotbed of spies and seditious plots. Someone should have seen it coming. The most remarkable thing about the atmosphere backstage at Ford's was that partisan feelings managed to stay suppressed for so long. Day after day, night after night, veterans of both Union and Confederate armies, some with relatives and friends still in the field, worked side by side through tiresome rehearsals and performances. Their professed or suppressed political sentiments ranged from ardent unionism tempered by years of harrowing military service to bitter secessionist ideals crushed by recent events at Appomattox. A clash was inevitable. In the fatal night's aftermath, these suppressed agendas and unsettled scores drove some to turn upon, and others to turn in, their fellow workers. Ironically, despite all this, Ford's was just reaching its height of popularity and profitability. That success, in fact the theater's very existence in the city of Washington in 1865, was a testimonial to the foresight and business acumen of owner-manager John T. Ford. Short, stocky, and pugnacious, friends preferred strong in his convictions, Ford conducted himself at all times with dignity and propriety. His strongest traits were his sharply focused intelligence, artistic sensibility, and keen sense of fair play. Gregarious and good-humored, he made friends easily, and could be charming, especially to anyone professionally helpful. Fiercely loyal to his friends and his actors, he took particular pleasure in nurturing the careers of promising young performers. Born in Baltimore on April 16, 1829, Ford learned self-discipline at 15, working as a clerk in his uncle's Richmond tobacco factory, which would be confiscated early in the war by the Confederate government and converted into the infamous Castle Thunder prison. At 20, he married 18-year-old Edith Andrews, a petite, frail, soft-spoken Quaker from Hanover County, Virginia, to whom he remained deeply devoted all his life. Leaving his uncle, he opened a newspaper stand at 7th and Broad Streets, opposite the Richmond Theater. Its actors congregated there, drawing him in with their talk of performances, and he was soon spending every possible minute at the theater, where he found his true calling. 1850s Richmond was a lively cultural center whose plantation society readily embraced the theater's stars. Whether melodramas, minstrel shows, or Shakespearean tragedies held the boards, Ford was fascinated more with the conduct of the audience, and quickly developed an eye for eccentric and ostentatious behavior. He captured much of it in a local color farce he titled Richmond as It Is, which he submitted to theater managers George Kunkel and Thomas Moxley, who staged it to popular acclaim. Ford quickly accepted their offer to become advertising manager and sometime playwright at a salary of $7.50 a week, which soon was doubled as he entered into a full partnership with the managers. Traveling with their minstrel Nightingale serenaders, he learned to craft enticing publicity notices, a skill that served him well for life. By 1855, the three men were jointly managing theaters in Richmond, Baltimore, and Washington, sharing a common stock company, a stable of actors who could support a visiting star or carry a whole play by themselves. To provide audiences with variety and the actors with greater experience, they rotated their actors among their three theaters. Many later became major stars, including Maggie Mitchell, Joseph Jefferson, John T. Raymond, John McCullough, and young John Wilkes Booth. Of the three cities, the managers' efforts in Washington were the least successful. The venerable National Theater on Pennsylvania Avenue burned in 1856, and several others quickly closed for lack of business. The capital's antebellum audiences, hard to attract and fairly lowbrow, preferred circuses to legitimate theater, and lacked funds after the financial panic of 1857. By contrast, the Baltimore venue, the Holiday Street Theater, succeeded from the start. One of the oldest theaters in America at the time, from its stage, the Star-Spangled Banner was first sung in 1819. But for a variety of reasons, the partnership soon dissolved, and Ford, brimming with confidence, branched out on his own. In 1859, with the help of Baltimore architect-builder James Gifford, he lavishly renovated the Holiday Street, enlarging its stage to accommodate opera. Success came quickly, to the point where Ford could purchase an impressive home on Gilmore Street on the northwest edge of the city. In short order, he was elected to the Baltimore City Council on the Nativist American or Know-Nothing party ticket, then as its president, becoming acting mayor for 2 years. But as the nation's secessionist crisis built to a head during the 1860-61 season, Ford and his employees found it increasingly difficult to ignore the city's rising factionalism. Many, if not most, Baltimoreans were sympathetic to the states' rights aims of the Confederacy. Rabid opposition to the draft, the war, and the president was common there, as it was in southern Maryland and on the state's eastern shore, both fundamentally Southern in spirit, prejudices, and customs, including slaveholding. In February 1861, volatile gangs of Baltimore plug uglies prevented President-elect Lincoln from traveling freely through the city to his inauguration. 2 months later, on Pratt Street, just 4 blocks south of Holiday, rioting erupted that led to the deaths of 4 soldiers of the 6th Massachusetts Regiment as they moved through the city on their way to Washington, along with 12 citizens. For much of the war, Baltimore remained an occupied city with an army garrisoned on Federal Hill, initially commanded by the notoriously repressive Union General Benjamin Butler. A new network of forts encircled the city, one of which covered part of Ford's front yard. Even under martial law, though, Baltimore remained seething with activity, recalled one of his actors after the war, a hotbed of spies and seditious plots. Many in the theatrical profession were decidedly, though not openly, on the side of the Confederacy. One reason: Southern people had always been great patrons of the theater, and treated actors as gentlemen and equals, rather than as the vagabonds most Northerners considered them. And now the courage and gallantry of the Confederate soldiers appealed to all that was romantic in the thespian temperament. Despite the Union fort on his property, Ford sympathized with the secessionist cause. His friendships with figures such as the city's police commissioner George P. Kane, who was arrested and imprisoned in 1862 for aiding the Confederacy, were open secrets. Upon hearing of Kane's arrest, John Wilkes Booth exclaimed, "I know George P. Kane well. He is my friend." Fellow Baltimorean and actor John E. Owens, a close friend of both Ford and Kane, was a frequent star at Ford's theaters. Having lost his own New Orleans theater to Union occupiers, Owens bitterly resented the North and remained an ardent Southern sympathizer. Captivating actress Maggie Mitchell, another frequent star at Ford's, was observed on several occasions stomping on an American flag during performances in Southern cities. The Richmond Enquirer praised both Owens and Mitchell for their devotion to the Southern cause. Likewise, Ford's correspondence with tragedian Edwin Forrest reflected their shared antipathy to the president. At one point during the war, Forrest wrote to Ford that Robert E. Lee could easily beat Lincoln in an election in both the North and the South. It was important, he said, to convince our...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?